Like so many things in life, this exhibition really was the product of meetings between friends and colleagues and making connections. The director of the Haynes Gallery, where I'm standing here, Paul Bright, has a friend, and that friend knew the Cochrans, a couple who has collected art in rural Georgia, LaGrange, Georgia, for a number of years. And we all got together over dinner at some time, and the Cochrans generously agreed to let students sort of curate a show from their collection and have it staged here at the Haynes Gallery. Everyone involved immediately knew that their really important collection of African American works on paper would be the archive for that exhibition. And so I organized a seminar to teach called Exhibiting Contemporary African American Art. And the 13 students in that class are curated and selected, wrote the labels and all the stuff, all the show that we're seeing around me here. The class was last spring, and that was a semester interrupted by COVID-19. And so we had all planned to go down to LaGrange, Georgia with the students, pick out the works for the exhibition, and you sort of have that real hands-on experience. But of course, we were not able to have that travel, and so we really had to improvise with Zoom. The Cochrans themselves were on a number of Zoom calls with our class, and so it became much more of a virtual curatorial project.
Curating this exhibit virtually was not something that any of us really expected to do.
I think it was definitely, honestly, very hard.
Curating the show is definitely a challenge at first.
We were, of course, looking at all these works, in a sense, virtually, their mediated forms.
The hardest part of this exhibition, curating it virtually, was not being able to see the works in this space.
Trying to figure out how the exhibit would feel in person as you're moving through the space, in terms of creating sight lines and creating groupings. How these works spoke to each other was something that we really couldn't figure out until we were in the space itself.
Specifically with this work, actually, a couple classmates and I were assigned to research this work specifically earlier in the semester, and when looking for an image online of it, since it's a print, there are obviously multiple iterations out in the art world, but we couldn't find exactly what this work would actually look like. When we were looking at scans in computers, this yellow in particular looked more green in some ways, more orange in some ways.
And it was really unclear how big all of the works were. Although we had the dimensions, we couldn't really tell. Like, for example, a piece like this, it was so much larger than we thought it would be, and captured our eyes so much more than on the screen.
So actually seeing the works here was kind of, a really incredible surprise.
Definitely makes the process a bit slower, but I think once you see all of the pieces finally in person and you get to experience them up close and face to face, it kind of makes you appreciate that much more how special it is to have an exhibition like this in the time that we're living in right now.
As we got more comfortable with the way things changed, we were able to still work together, and I really do feel like the show came together in a way that it would have even if we were able to meet in person.
Once the works of art were in-house, some of the students who did not graduate were able to assemble the show in consultation with Paul Bright and Katie Wolf, who were here at Haynes. So it really was a labor of love for the students and for the Cochrans, and for me, and I'm really proud of all the hard work the students did to select the works, to write the text, and really assemble a coherent, really important show for Wake Forest. W.B. Du Bois was an important Black American intellectual at the turn of the 20th century who came up with this idea of double consciousness. And this is sort of this notion that Black Americans had to reconcile their African identity and their African heritage with living in a European-dominated culture. And so there was a sort of dilemma for Black Americans. Should they try to assimilate and become more like the white Europeans, or try to celebrate their African heritage? And for Du Bois, this led to a sort of a split identity for Black Americans. And the students were really taken to this idea and thought that portraiture would be an interesting way to frame and sort of think about an exhibition, how other people, how Black Americans see themselves, and also, within those portraits can also see how others see them.
This piece is by Jacob Lawrence, and it's entitled Revolt on the Amistad, created in 1989. This is a really incredible piece in our exhibition that really encapsulates the abstract nature of portraiture. So the subject matter of this work is showing the revolt on a slave ship called the Amistad in the late 1800s, when the Africans overthrew their owners, the Spanish people trying to capture them. This is a narrative that's really present in a lot of African Americans' minds today and shows the history that all of them have suffered and now are kind of taking ownership of. This work, at first glance, seems very joyful with the vibrant colors, but when you look at it further, the violent message really comes through and displays this portrait and history of the African Americans in our society today.
Yeah, so this is the Tina Maria Dunkley piece, Blessed Are the Fruits of Free Labor. I really like this piece because of the imagery that it portrays and the feelings and emotions that it evokes for my people. The watermelon, it resembles a slave ship, and the tiny seeds represent the enslaved people. And one thing about Tina Maria Dunkley is she likes to investigate the African diaspora as it is saturated in European history. So just seeing it through this lens and knowing that the watermelon has been a negative stereotype for African Americans for a long time, and it being a slave ship, it just evokes a lot of different emotion. With different people, it can bring a lot of different perspectives and stories behind it.
Emma AMOS, her American Girl from 1974. And in this picture, you see in front and center a black woman with an afro, and especially in the early to mid 1970s, an afro was a sign for cultural and political to think about celebrating African heritage. And you see too here on the right of the picture, we see the schematic American flag. Sort of the squares become sort of surrogate stars with the stripes over here on the right. And so here, by calling the picture American Girl, we see Emma AMOS sort of thinking about this idea of double consciousness, that she is a black woman here that she depicts in this print, but also we see here she's saying she's an American woman. And there's been a lot of recent discussion about how it is, primarily black, civil rights movement and black Americans who've done a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of social change in this country, with civil rights and now with Black Lives Matter. So this picture really does encapsulate a number of these ideas, the struggles and the celebrations that are very much part of black identity in America.
These two pieces behind me are by Morgan and Marvin Smith. They were two twin brothers who actually had a photography studio in Harlem in the 1930s. It opened in 1937. And kind of throughout their practice, they were very focused on really just portraying the Black experience in a very empowering and dignified way. And I think a sense of realism is very apparent in all of their works across all mediums. So obviously these two works are not photography. It kind of reflects some earlier experimentation before they opened their studio. And this one to my right, I really love because I think it really portrays all of the aspects of their work that was important to them. You sort of see this man who is a bit tired looking, and he has a little dirt on his collar after what seems to be a long day of work, but I think he still feels very resolute and calm in his expression with the blue watercolor that surrounds him. And then to my left is kind of this man caught in, I guess, what is a moment of contemplation. It's a bit more serious. And again, all of the qualities feel so realistic. And I think the feel of it is so intimate, like you're really kind of being invited into whatever he's feeling in that moment. And I think in that way, it kind of feels like a very privileged experience in viewing these works.
Herbert Gentry's The Watch. It's an etching on paper. It's undated. A little bit about Herbert Gentry. He was born in 1919, right in the heart of the Harlem Renaissance. His mother was actually a very accomplished dancer, so he grew up around artistry, jazz, music, and artists at the time. So he was super influenced by that world. He actually served in World War II. So on the GI Bill in 1953, he went abroad to Paris. And in Paris, he opened up a club gallery called Chez Honey in Montparnasse, and it was there that philosophers, musicians, artists of the time all came together and really discussed philosophy, art, and music at the time. So again, he was super influenced by his time abroad. He always maintained a workshop in Paris, but he also traveled to Copenhagen and Stockholm. So this time abroad super influenced his work. Today we're going to be looking at the watch. As you can see, it has these really modular and circular forms that emphasize the features of these abstracted figures, the faces, the eyes of the work, just all those circular forms, they're really like coming out at you. It's almost as if these figures are being molded out of the canvas themselves. It's like they're being pressed up against this invisible fourth wall. He was really inspired overall by African art in terms of these the structures of the way he rendered his figures. And there's almost a musicality to his form in the way it's rhythmic, it undulates at you, it's really projecting into space in an interesting way. And then additionally, all these figures, the way the eyes are emphasized, they're looking straight at you. It's this really, forceful, confrontational perspective that we're getting of these figures, which in turn creates the question of, are we the viewers watching these figures, or are the figures watching us?
Willie Cole's American Domestic from 2016 also, I think, encapsulates a number of this exhibition's themes. You will probably recognize how Willie Cole is using Grant Wood's famous painting American Gothic from 1930 as his source material here. And American Gothic is one of those paintings that's taken on a life a very large life in American culture. This depiction of these two white farmers has come and stand in for America in some ways. And what Willie Cole reminds us by sort of grafting these sort of African masks onto the two central figures in this painting are the repressed histories of America. The ways that perhaps the labor and much of the building of American culture, American wealth even, was done through either unpaid labor in slavery or underpaid labor during Jim Crow. And you'll see too the ironing board front and center with the iron brands in this picture. And Willie Cole himself has said this refers to the domestic labor done by so many black women in America. But also, I think, too, with the iron, we can see some correspondences to the diagrams of the ships that took enslaved Africans from their homeland to America and other places. And so here we also have this reference to slavery. So I think what's really fascinating about this picture overall is the way that we see this canonical American painting from 1930, but Willie Cole reminds us of these other histories that are not told, that have been repressed by American and indeed American art histories.
This is ROMARE BEARDEN's The Family from 1975. When we were talking with the Cochrans about the show and about the works, this work in particular was kind of pivotal for them in that it was one of the first African-American artists that Wes and Missy had collected. Bearden himself is a very prominent artist, and the work shows a lot, or is in line with a lot of his other work, that he works a lot in collage. So even though that this is a etching and a print, it feels very collaged in a lot of its components. When thinking about prints and about these artists, Bob Blackburn was also a name that really came up a lot for Wes and Missy. There's actually a fun anecdote that Wes shared with us when we were on campus here together, that when they initially saw this piece in a show many years ago, Blackburn walked by and was like, "Yeah, that looks really great. I'm very happy with how that turned out." And Wes goes, "That's not your work." It definitely was a very collaborative process for a lot of these artists, and that community that Wes and Missy so treasured, and the relationships that they treasured, with Blackburn and Bearden and the other artists that are shown in our exhibition. But most notably, the work is about kind of that Black Southern experience at the time, and doesn't give you a very clear way to place the scene, but it is definitely kind of an archetypal view into like what the day-to-day for a family at the time would look like.
I felt like I was a specialist in African American contemporary art, specifically through the Cochrane collection. It was incredible to kind of feel like I had a lot of knowledge on one genre in the art world and felt like I could kind of inform other people about it and have really informational conversations about it.
Understanding what goes into an exhibition like this, as a viewer, having been able to participate makes you appreciate the viewing experience so much more.
I'm excited for this exhibit to be able to impact the Wake Forest community, where oftentimes race relations, they're right in our backyard and they're extremely tangible. It really made us reconsider, how history is constructed and who it's constructed by. In this exhibit, we're able to showcase these figures as central to the narrative.
Wes and Missy's collection shows that, they were collecting artists and works that were really not what the mainstream galleries and what, the quote canon at that time was featuring. I think we're seeing a lot of these artists get the attention that they finally deserve.
Of course, with the Black Lives Matters movement over the summer, I think we all kind of realized that there was a whole nother layer of meaning to this exhibit and the work that we were doing. We realized that I think there could really be lasting effects.
Being a part of something bigger than myself and contributing something to the larger Wake Forest community.
This work is so important and of such quality that these are not just great Black artists, these are incredible artists, and this is about Black identity.
Learning to appreciate the artists as artists and learning about their stories through their works. I felt like I was able to see a lot of their souls put into these pieces, and so it was just interesting to learn what their perspective was and what our class thought about the pieces, and just bring all of those together to gain new insight around what it means to be a Black artist and just an artist in general as well.
And I'm excited for Wake Forest to see it.